Bore da, good morning. Hope you're all feeling well and who wouldn't be in this glorious weather we're having. Thank you for joining us today. Before we start the webinar properly, please be aware that there are some sort of housekeeping that we just want to run through really just so everybody knows what's happening and how it's going to work. Obviously you will see that your camera and microphone are off. You can use the chat facility, but please, only use the chat facility for sort of key questions, because obviously if there are key questions that you have that you want us to answer at the end of the session, then it just makes it easier for us to monitor that in terms of being able to see what those key questions are. The event is being recorded and that will be available for you on our website, on the Children Wales website for you to view, and we'll hopefully send them across to you as well. If you've registered with us, we'll be able to send those across to you. So you will get the PowerPoint slides available to you, and they will be on the website as well, and as well as the recording. How it's going to work today generally is we're going to have mainly sort of a presentation, two sections really to the presentation, and then there will be opportunity for sort of questions at the end. But please be mindful. I know a few people said they have to leave. That's fine. If you do have any burning questions that you don't get around to asking, please, our contact details are there. We're here to provide any advice and guidance. So if you want something in terms of questions or anything, please follow up with us, and we're happy to provide that later on. I think we just waited for a couple more because I think we've got expecting a couple more people. So yeah, we'll give it 2 more minutes and then we'll carry on. Okay, so we're going to make a start. So as I said, croeso, welcome, bore da, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for coming to this webinar. I'm Kate Thomas. I am the Senior Officer on the Tackling Impact of Poverty on Education programme, and I will be delivering this webinar today, presenting along with my colleague Abby Bryant, who you can see there as well, who is the Information Officer on the programme as well. Just the information really, the programme itself is funded by the Welsh Government Equity and Education Division, and the key aims really of this programme is very much to provide sort of awareness, guidance, sort of information really on poverty related issues to support schools across Wales in order to sort of remove those hidden costs, if you like, that we know act as a real barrier for learners to be able to sort of participate fully in their school life. And so, as a result of poverty, that enables them not to fully participate and sort of achieve as best as they could in their environment within that school setting. So that's very much what the guides, what the programme is about, and that's obviously the key driver for us within that. Both myself and Abby work for Children in Wales. Children in Wales is an umbrella body for sort of organisations and individuals who work with children, young people and their families across Wales. We also undertake sort of a lot of direct work with children and young people, ensuring that sort of their voice are amplified and they have a say really on what matters to them. So it's very much driven sort of, children's rights, if you like, is very much a focus for us as an organisation. And this programme, tackling the impact of poverty on education very much aligns with that work, and sort of, the sort of Children Wales sort of drive around poverty and children's rights in particular. The rights of the child are a key driver within this programme and all this area of work, and I'll be just going to mention how that connects with the school sort of setting before we go on to really talk about the sort of main sort of programme and obviously the importance of specific to you as governors, how that would work.
Good day, everybody. All children have the right to an education. In Wales, education is hopefully free, but not all families can actually afford the hidden costs that Kate just mentioned in the school day. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child actually set out the rights of children. It's an international agreement, and some of those rights are shown here. These ones are particularly pertinent to children in the context of their school day. And if any of these rights are negatively impacted by poverty, then these learners are less likely to be able to fulfil the four purposes of the new curriculum for Wales, namely to be ambitious, capable learners, enterprising, creative contributors, ethical, informed citizens, and healthy, confident individuals. Mike, Kate.
Sorry, thank you, Abby. Yeah, just wanted to highlight really that children's rights are a real factor for Children Wales, and obviously Welsh Government is a key driver, and aligning those with poverty and sort of equity is really critical and is a huge part of this programme. So today's webinar, we're going to be sort of focusing really on the following areas. This is what we're going to cover today. We're very briefly going to touch upon poverty, because poverty in itself is huge, and we could be here, talking about it for ages. It's very complex, but we just want to give you a real sort of flavour about, what the current picture is in Wales, and what that means for our children and people and families within Wales, and especially within a school setting. Then we're going to share with you what tools we've been using as part of the programme with schools, and kind of what tools we've used really to mitigate that impact of poverty, and how sort of effective they've been from using this approach really within a school environment. Then we're going to look at what is available for schools to help with tackling poverty in education, before then looking at the new governor's resource, which is launching from today, and is very much aligned to the tools that we've been using within the school, and we've had lots of success from that. But what we wanted to do was create a particular governor specific resource which would allow you to kind of look at from your point of view and kind of look at what you could do within your role as a governor. So we will be looking at that new governor resource. Again, those resources will be available to you, and they will be launched officially tomorrow on the website. Hopefully we can provide some sort of solutions and sort of recommendations really, like I said, on how you can help within your role, so that you can sort of create that positive change really within the school setting. So poverty, really, sadly and not acceptably, the poverty and attainment gap in Wales has existed for some time. Sadly, in many cases, it's widening, it's not reducing in any shape. Poverty, as I said, is very complex. And there's so many different factors involved, and actually school settings in particularly for some can actually exacerbate the situation, adding to pressures for those learners sort of around attainment, well-being, in those kind of situations. So it is really something that we really need to work on and to get better at. And I know that there's a lot of work that Welsh Government have been doing to try and help in this area, and obviously this programme is one of those key areas as well. Quite simply, for children and young people to be able to learn, then we really need to remove those barriers, those hidden costs that I mentioned, and those challenges that poverty can bring to them. So what is poverty in its most basic form? what you can see on the screen currently is what Welsh Government use as their definition, and when they're talking about poverty, in particular child poverty. So there you can see there's a long-term state of not having sufficient resources to afford food, reasonable living conditions or amenities, or to participate in activities such as access to attractive neighbourhoods and open spaces that are taken for granted by others in their society. So that is the, so the key definition that Welsh Government uses within their child poverty, sort of when they're talking about it. And interestingly as well, the new child poverty strategy consultation is going live now, and they will be retaining this definition. So when we talk about poverty, and particularly in this kind of environment and this setting, that's what we're talking about. Also, I think it's worth knowing as well that the sort of key indicator that Welsh Government often use in terms of child poverty, one of them is the sort of percentage of children living in households below 60% of the median UK household income, and that is after housing costs. And the reason that is used, sort of the after housing cost in particular, is because housing costs differ so widely across the UK. So measuring sort of after these sort of gives the best sort of comparative result, if you like, in terms of sort of looking at poverty, for example. But quite simply, for our families, children, young people, that's the strategic kind of drive, I guess, around child poverty. But for children, young people and families, what that means is stress, pressures, difficult choices. So, we've all heard those things, heating or eating. There are families that are having to make those choices, and it's increasing. So, the fact is that, there's exclusion for those children and young people from sort of everyday activities that we often take for granted, I think. So, at its simplest form, that's what we're talking about, and that's what we're trying to do within this programme, is to really remove the barriers and, the barriers to participation for those children and people within that school environment. So the current sort of status in Wales isn't great. It hasn't been great for some time. We are making some way. There are some improvements in some areas, but the statistics are, fairly depressing. There's not much change in terms of stats, if you like, and those stats actually suggest, recent evidence suggests that, it's not going anywhere, I guess, is the answer. That is, it's likely to get worse. And obviously we've got the cost of living crisis and things like that are adding to those pressures in particular. Probably coming as no surprise that majority of the sort of children coming from poverty will be from homes that receive income related benefits, and that's probably not a surprise. But I think one of the interesting sort of changes, if you like, in terms of current climate really, is this area around in-work poverty. That is definitely on the rise, and we're seeing more of that, and that means essentially that there is children in poverty with at least sort of one sort of a person in the household working. So there is a real rise there, and we are seeing more and more of that. And obviously what that does is that kind of skewers some of the figures, I think, and the stats for us, because it's very difficult to measure, and that also means that a lot of them won't be entitled to financial support, so they can often miss through, sort of fall through that net. So that is a real area that we really need to kind of be aware of, in particularly. It says there 4 in 10 children living in poverty in Wales. It's not good enough. We need to do more. So just a kind of snapshot, really. I'm not going to go into too much information here, but who is living in poverty in Wales, or who are the most at risk, if you like, of being in poverty. There's quite a high list there, as you can see: children of lone parent families, children in large families, more than 3 children, children growing in a household where there's no one in full-time employment, and that's very much linked to sort of part-time work, no contract hours, childcare. Obviously, all these things really exacerbate those situations. Minority ethnic communities, disabled child or adult within the household, migrant workers, asylum-seeking children, and obviously, as we've mentioned, that sort of in-work poverty, at least one person working within the household. So, there's an exhaustive list there, and that's just the kind of key ones that have at most risk. So, it's is stark really, and it's very worrying for us, I think. So a couple of things just to be really mindful. I kind of mentioned this in terms of cost of living crisis, I guess. The impact of COVID-19 hasn't gone away. It hasn't left us. It's still very much there, I think, in terms of within the school environment. Particularly, I think teachers that we speak to say that they still see the effects of it. And obviously then the cost of living crisis is just adding to that pressure and those stresses. We at Children Wales, we do a annual child poverty strategy. Annual survey, and we have a lot of information from there that's saying that it still has, it's had a real impact on them. And that's just a quote from one of the people who filled out the survey in terms of how it feels really, sort of in terms of how they're supporting families and what they're seeing. And it does make for sort of quite depressing, real sort of issues really. Again, there is, we can't mention sort of the COVID and the attendance, obviously, and I think, again, this is something the schools are seeing particularly. This is an issue, and there's so many factors around this, lower self-esteem in general, not being able to come to school because of different reasons. So there is a huge area around attendance, and cost of living and poverty, are adding to those issues as well. So it's kind of looking at how we can manage them. But yeah, there is, a drop in attendance as well in terms of that. So we've kind of covered poverty is all very, very sad, and it doesn't look good. And in terms of school, why is this a problem within schools? We've mentioned attendance, we've mentioned low self-esteem and the impact there. But in particularly in school, why is it so critical? Well, we know the school, at its best has the potential to sort of provide all children with the opportunity to learn, make friends and participate, have different experiences. And so, it can be a really positive place. Unfortunately, for some children coming from poverty in particular, the hidden costs that we keep talking about can add a really difficult sort of way for them to navigate the day, and it has massive implications for them in terms of their learning, their participation. So as much as the school can be such a positive place, it can also cause sort of barriers as well. Costs associated with accessing some of those opportunities in school may often mean that they miss out on those opportunities, and it's often sort of in ways that go unseen, and like I said, that's why we concentrate on the hidden costs. And there is a huge amount of shame and stigma that can be attached to poverty in particular, and not being able to afford those extra sort of costs, if you like, or those hidden costs. So it can have huge implications on attainment and well-being of those learners. Things, not having enough money for school uniform, clothing, equipment, all these things are a real issue. And sadly then not having enough money to cover food costs during the school day, for example, can really add pressures to those children, young people, and obviously families as well. So it's a real concern, and it just adds a number of barriers. So that's why it's so important for us to really look at how we can sort of mitigate that within the school setting. How can we make our schools as sort of as equitable as possible, really, and remove that shame and stigma that a lot of learners and pupils feel then within that school environment. I'm just going to try and share a short video clip with you. Technology being how it is, I have practiced and it did work, so hopefully it will work. But this video was done by National Education Union back 2019. You may have seen it, but it really sort of encapsulates, if you like, what I was saying about some of the experiences that these children and young people experience within that school setting. So I'm hoping I can show it. So if you just bear with me a minute just to try and get it onto the big screen, we'll give it a go.
I've been at my school for 25 years, and this is the worst poverty I've ever seen. We see children from homes that are struggling on universal credit, or trying to work, but not being paid enough to provide for their families.
I work in a school in a very deprived area. Most of our children don't have food at home. Children will often hoard food when it's available, just in case they don't have any when they get home. A child I teach says if they won £1 million, they make sure there will be food in the fridge every day.
I see children begging other students for food.
When it's cold, some pupils come to school with no coat or stay home when it's raining.
Children are sharing PE kits because they can't afford one each. Some children are sleeping on the floor in the dining room and sharing beds in shifts.
We've provided uniform for children who can't pay for it. We've even provided shampoo, shoes and basic toiletries.
We have pupils living with their grandparents because parents can't afford to feed or clothe them. Children only have one chance for childhood.
So I'm just going to go back and share the presentation. So hopefully that worked and everybody was able to see that. But yeah, so it just kind of really pulls together the whole sort of thing I was talking about, really about missing out on opportunities, how those hidden costs can really play a part in the school life, if you like, of those children and families that we work with. Okay, so I'm back on the presentation, hopefully. Yes, okay. Yes, so just to kind of carry on, really what I'm going to focus now is, in terms of the impact. So, what does that really look like in reality for the children and people within that school environment? Obviously these things are happening, but what does that look like? So as you can see, we know that, from a lot of research and evidence, we know that, overall poverty damages children's health, well-being, their learning, attainment, and also their future outcomes. So there's, like I said, there's a wealth of research and evidence that provide this information, that we know that poverty has a huge impact on children's learning at school, and consequently their education and attainment levels also as well. So we know that pupils from lower income families are more likely to experience the following, as you can see in that diagram there on the presentation, things like self-esteem, bullying, sort of related to poverty, so stigma, it plays a part in there, not sort of achieving their full potential, ill health as well, and things like that. So there's a whole host of things that really impact those children. Interestingly, there was a sort of research that was done around loneliness, and as you can see there, that 20% of children aged 10 to 15 receiving free school meals reported often feeling lonely, sort of being lonely compared to 80% of non-free school pupils. So there is a whole host of things around isolation in particular, but not being able to do the same things as your peers really has a detrimental impact on those children and young people as well. So yeah, so these are just a whole host of things that can really impact them. So in practical, I guess, in practical ways, these are, so we talk about these emotional things really, but practically, these are the challenges, I guess. So this is what we have, we have to overcome. So things like, right clothes and uniform, travelling and transport costs, the right resources for equipment for lessons. Do we have access to those things at home or be able to bring them in? Do we have money to bring those items in, for example? Stigma and isolation, which I've mentioned, which is a real, it's very much on the rise actually, and it'd be interesting to see what the next Children Wales poverty survey suggests, because the last one it came out really high that sort of bullying and stigma, isolation was a real issue for children and young people within school in particular. Affording trips, events, that kind of thing, food obviously and the ability to pay for it, and then obviously extracurricular activities, the after school clubs and, you know, on the trips and the events, those kind of things really, and obviously critically home learning, having the resources at home to be able to be really to be, you know, participate as much as possibly. So just going on really just to kind of go through what we've been using in school as part of the programme and what's been really working well to combat some of these things, because, you know, this is what it's about essentially. You know, we know a lot of this information, we know that the stats are, you know, are very stark and it's not very positive, but there are things being done, and one of the tools that we sort of use and we have used and suggest to schools is the guides. So the Price of Pupil Poverty guides, you may have come across these before. So these are the original kind of guides that were done back in September 2019, and the governor's resource, the new guides, very much builds on this, but is more specific to you know, a governor sort of role and sort of coming from a governor perspective really. But it does take from this, because we know that the information, the evidence within this is really critical and is still very much relevant now. So, you know, the governor's resource is very much updated, built on the success of this, if you like. So like I said, you know, this has been proven to be very effective for schools. These are available on the Welsh Government hub, as well as the Children in Wales website. So you can access them there if you want to sort of look more closely at them. Essentially, they're a key resource for schools, you know, in Wales, and what they do is sort of aim to raise awareness of poverty issues, you know, what are the drivers, you know, for poverty, what's the impact, which we've kind of covered already, kind of thing, and then looks at, you know, what can we do, you know. That's great talking about this, but what can we do? What changes can we make? And the guides provide a number of sort of tangible and cost-effective solutions the schools can sort of put in place, if you like, to contribute to that in sort of improved learner well-being. And it's very much driven through a whole school approach. And I know Abby will mention some more about that shortly. The guides cover sort of the 5 key areas that we know impact the most. So things like understanding poverty, very much about policy, you know, what does it mean? You know, do we understand what it's like for those children, young people and families? School uniform and clothing, food and hunger, participation in the life of the school, and then the homeschool relationship. So each of these areas identifies sort of key drivers and the problems, like I said, you know, looks at the impact, which is usually very negative. But the key here is that it provides solutions based on best practice, so what we know works, and obviously what we've got evidence of it working. And like I said, they're available on the hub and as part of the Tackling the Impact of Poverty and Education programme for you to have a look. So we've worked with a number of schools across Wales in supporting them to implement this approach. We took part in a pilot, and we're obviously sort of pushing this out to schools currently within our new sort of sign up. But, you know, there's just some examples really about what, you know, what they've kind of felt from being involved in the process, and some of the positive sort of creating change that they've been able to do as part of that. So, you know, we've got that it's a very valuable process and can definitely have a positive impact on pupils' well-being and education attainment. Interesting then there, as a school, I thought that we supported all learners, but through evaluating practice, we realised that there was so much more we could do to help our families and ultimately support our pupils to be in a place ready to learn. And I think that's a really key one, because it is about getting them to a place to be ready to learn, allowing them the opportunity to learn and to thrive. You know, we talk about attainment, and that is very important, obviously, but if we're not ready, we won't be able to, you know, achieve that attainment. So we really need to get them in a place, and that means, you know, supporting them to break down those barriers that, you know, especially where costs can be a problem. So there's a number of sort of resources and toolkits attached to the guides themselves, but they're all available for schools, and that's kind of the tool that we've been using. And like I said, you know, a lot of success and effectiveness from that. So just some snapshots really of the sort of solutions. You know, we mentioned solutions, you know, tangible, cost-effective solutions. we know schools' budgets are tight. We know the resources within schools are tight, and you know, for many schools and teachers and things, they have to be sort of everything. You know, have to be everything and everyone. They almost have to do everything a little bit. So you know, there are ways of not having to put too much pressure on schools. Little things can make the big difference for these children and families. So there's just a snapshot really of some really clever thinking within the school that they've identified, and that's created a big impact. One in particular that's always kind of one of my favourite really, when the school identified that there was some stigma and sort of some bullying attached to sort of when they did go on sort of a trip or days away, or they were sort of going out of the school for over lunch period for whatever, that there was some attachment to the sort of the free school meal pupils having a sort of brown bag, if you like, to take with them and to have their sort of lunch in, and actually they felt quite embarrassed because they weren't the same as their peers. You know, the peers were sitting there with their little, you know, Paw Patrol lunch bags or you know, Buzz Lightyear or whatever, and they didn't have that. So what they did was to sort of get in a whole host of lunch boxes, and they allowed the children to be able to pick the lunch box before they went on that trip or that event, and to be able to put their food into that so that they felt more sort of inclusive and similar to their peers, and that had a really positive effect, and they've seen sort of more children coming along on the trips and things like that. So you know, it's just a real small snippet just to evidence the changes that you can make within the school. So impact, so from evaluating the process, you know, this is just a real snapshot really of some of the sort of, you know, positive impact that's happened within those schools who have taken on this kind of thinking and this method really. So schools, you know, saw improvements and changes in sort of policy and practice, that actually removed sort of an intentional stigma, if you liked, increased staff awareness and, you know, sort of knowledge of poverty, understanding the bigger picture and how important that is, and also improved a sort of knowledge of parents and their opinions on poverty as well, and being really involved in sort of the changes they were making was really important. So very much poverty awareness for all, if you like, and ultimately reduction or removal, if you like, of cost barriers to participate in learning. You know, that was also something that was highlighted as well. So, you know, better access to opportunities and obviously reduce financial pressures for families as well as part of that. So those are just some key sort of snippets really about the impact and you know, how positive it can be. What I'm going to do now is hand you over to Abby, who's going to drill more down, as we said, into the sort of the current resources we've got available for schools now, and then talk about the governor's resources and explain some more about that. But like I said, if there's any questions on any of that, there will be time at the end to do that. So so yeah, use the chat for those questions towards the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. We thought it'd be a good idea before we moved on to looking at the governor's resource, the new governor's resource in more detail, to give you a little bit more background information, what is currently available for schools. So Kate has already touched on the whole Price of Pupil Poverty Guide, which sit on Hub, all 52 pages long, which have been available to schools for a long time. But this year, back in the spring, we've really had a drive to encourage schools across Wales to sign up to our Tackling the Impact of Poverty on Education programme, whereby they can actually have more resources, things like extra training, updated reports, and a whole host of things to help put a plan into place really to tackle impact of poverty in schools. It's quite important to note that schools do not have to be signed up to our programme in order for the governor's guides to be of benefit. But obviously, we would encourage schools to be signed up. And if you think it's something that your school could or should be doing and they're not already, then please point them in our direction. We have links to our email addresses and web pages further on in the presentation. So back in the spring, emailing all schools in Wales or trying to get hold of them through local consortia bulletins or local authority mailings, If schools sign up to our Tackling the Impact of Poverty on Education programme, they get access to a whole host of extra resources. So they will have access to a how-to guide, so thinking about how to actually go about putting a plan in place to tackle poverty in their schools. A checklist, which is a major document for schools to go through, having a look at things that perhaps they're already doing and signposting things that they're already doing well, but also maybe highlighting things that they're not already doing or could be doing a little bit better. And then from that checklist, using an action plan example to see how an action plan could be put into place. Followed through with an action plan template whereby schools get the chance to sort of flesh out their plan for the coming term, coming year, whatever timescale they think will actually suit. It's important to note that it's not one size fits all. We don't ask schools to address every single issue across the checklist or anything that's suggested in the guides, because some schools are already doing great things and some schools, you know, certain things aren't appropriate for them. So it's very much a case of having a little look through the checklist, the guides, seeing what progress could be made in certain areas in your school, and then putting an action plan in place for that. We've also this year introduced a community platform, which is a sharing area, which we hope, it's very much in its infancy at the minute, and our signed up schools have said it's a good resource, but we're very much hoping it's an area where schools can share best practice, because we know that there's fantastic things already going on in schools at the moment, and schools can ask questions of each other on this community platform. So if a school has an issue in a particular area that they really can't think of a solution to, ask the question on the community platform, and then hopefully another school has come up with something that they could share and use. So the community platform in its infancy, but again, a major benefit for schools signing up to our programme. And also schools get access to a parent survey. Really important to include parent voice when addressing an action plan for tackling poverty in schools. And schools can use this survey to send out to parents to ascertain whether or not there are hidden costs that schools actually hadn't thought of in the school day. Completely free to sign up. We are encouraging all schools, and indeed some local authorities are actually encouraging schools to sign up as well. So we're hoping to see a lot more take up as well as the year goes on. So that's just to give you a background idea of what is actually available to schools. So if we move on to the governor's guides, these very much follow on in the vein of the full Price of Pupil Poverty guides. So they contain background information across the 5 key areas: understanding poverty, school uniform and clothing, food and hunger, participation in the life of the school, and the home-school relationship. Full of background information, and also hints and tips, pointers and signposting, extra resources that you can use, and also giving you guidance on what you can be doing as governors to support your school in tackling the impact of poverty on the school day. We see it very much as a whole school approach, as Kate mentioned earlier. So for school staff, it's being aware of the issues that poverty can have upon their learners. For pupils and parents, it's been able to give pupils and parents a voice so that they can feed into any changes, etc., that need to be made to the school. With a community, it's a school being able to reach out for resources and also signposting resources that the community might have that might help with certain issues. And then for you guys as governors, it's acting as a critical friend, really. So supporting the school in any process they put in place to tackle the impact of poverty. Okay, so as I said, we're going to look at all really a snippet of what the guides contain for you as governors. So a whole host of background information, but with some action points that governors can do. These aren't in their entirety, there's a lot more in the guides, but just to give you a flavour of what you can expect from the guides. So governors can help to review policies in line with Welsh Government guidance, and always keeping issues that pupils from lower income families face in mind. Ensure regular updates with regard to the use of the Pupil Development Grant. Is it being used well? Could it be used in a slightly different way to help tackle the poverty issues? Involvement in school self-evaluation, improvement and accountability, and really importantly, ensuring that equity or tackling poverty is a standard agenda at governor meetings. So if this is a standing agenda in government meetings, it'll give you a lot more space to focus and understand on what's going on for this community, and give you a better idea on how you can best support the school to support their learners from lower income families. You can use the knowledge to inform decision and policy making within a governing body level. View the operational decision-making and practice of the school through this poverty lens to advocate for children from lower income families with their rights, make suggestions and enable constant and ongoing consideration and review, which will help to make fluid changes when necessary. Looking at school uniform and clothing, school uniform can be a huge cost for families. So as governors, you can be aware and ensure your school regards the Welsh Government's statutory guidance on school uniforms, including due regard is given to cost and affordability. So not all families have the money available to them to buy extra uniform when something needs to be washed or something needs to be mended. Practical considerations when considering introducing or changing uniforms. Is this necessary? Affordability, access and availability of uniforms. Do they have to be from specialist shops or can supermarkets supply certain items? Consider if the school logo is essential. I know this has been talked of quite a lot lately. Is it that school uniform colours can be enough to garner a sense of community? Consider how much flexibility there is and how uniform infringements are handled by staff. Are there any penalties or sanctions handed out if a child turns up to school without the correct PE kit or without wearing the correct uniform? And ensure that schools are raising awareness of the school's essential grant for those who are eligible. Currently, that's all free school meal children and also looked after children, but bearing in mind that there's lots of families now who are falling just outside of the criteria for free school meals. They're sort of hidden families affected by lower incomes. Moving on to food and hunger. Hunger in school is a huge issue, meaning that children can't concentrate on their day. So again, like with all the other areas of the guides, lots more background information in the guides themselves. And these are just a few of the things that we suggest governors can do to help support your school for food and hunger. Ensure regular updates on the uptake of free school meals and take part in discussions on how to ensure as many families as possible take up this entitlement. I think there's a figure of about 25% of those eligible don't actually take up free school meals because they're actually concerned with stigma or shame of doing so. Find out how lunchtimes are managed and what measures are put in place to ensure no child misses out on a school meal due to lack of access or time. So some schools may have introduced staggered lunch times. It can be a case where there's not as much variety available, if that's the case. And are there long queues in place that mean sometimes young people don't actually stay to get their lunch? Consider breakfast provision, and the governor's guides set out the availability of things that local authorities offer to help here. Establish what arrangements are made for the statutory obligation to provide free drinking water on site, and find out if the school takes part in the school holiday enrichment programme and what the uptake is like amongst lower income families. The school holiday enrichment programme also includes food and education and nutrition advice. Okay, moving on to participation in the life of the school. Research has shown that those pupils who fully participate in school have better educational outcomes long term, and we know that those from lower income families can sometimes face barriers in full participation for numerous reasons. So as governors, you might be able to ensure regular updates and reports again on how the pupil development grant is spent, undertake an audit on the fundraising and celebration events that are held at the school over the year and look to implement a policy that limits these to a certain number. So for example, sometimes non-uniform days, which are very welcome with lots of pupils, can be a barrier to pupils from lower income if they have to contribute. And also with regards to having to think about what to actually wear to school on a non-uniform day. And review the charging policy of the school. So, for example, trips related to the curriculum aren't chargeable, and those in receipt of free school meals shouldn't be charged for any trips in line with Welsh Government guidance, but referring back again to the fact that not all those eligible are actually taking up free school meals. And lastly, the homeschool relationship. And again, where parents are fully engaged in a positive way with schools, it does benefit learners' long-term educational learning. So what can governors do here? Again, when you see the guides, which are due to be published imminently, there'll be a lot more background information, but just a snippet of things that you could be thinking of doing. Reviewing the school's homework policy to ensure it's inclusive, gives consideration to the ability of all learners to complete homework tasks at home, bearing in mind, do everybody have access to IT at home or resources that they might need actually to fulfil their homework? Consider when the school holds homework clubs, making them accessible to learners whose family might struggle to miss out if they don't have equipment. And also thinking on things like, do pupils have to get school bus home? Does that mean that they're going to miss out on homework clubs or enrichment activities? Appoint a family engagement officer, possibly funded through a pupil development grant. And if you actually already have one at your school, ask for regular feedback on the well-being of pupils from lower income families. Make links with the wider community and signpost other services, and look at establishing a parent council to help inform and support ways to improve parental engagement and ensure their voices are heard in decision making. Referring back to the toolkit in our Tackling the Impact of Poverty programme, that's one of the important reasons we put in a parent survey, so that parents think their voices or can be heard. Okay, so key considerations when considering policies and practice. Think about whatever you're doing, is it actually reducing stigma around poverty, or is it inadvertently making it worse? Be careful not to make assumptions about what people can afford, and be aware that there are hidden costs to school day that are not always apparently obvious. Whatever you should be looking to implement or develop should hopefully be removing barriers to learning and not impounding them. And be understanding of the impact of whatever changes you're making in the school, whether they be positive or negative, and bearing in mind it's not just about the free school meal pupils. Remember those that actually fall just outside of it, and think of it as a whole school approach. Just a couple more examples from what happened in our pilot study. Kate already touched on a few, but there's a couple here. I'll read out a couple and leave you to have a little look at the rest. So, for example, the bottom right, a parent council has been formed following a consultation evening about improving communication. They meet half-termly, and reports on ideas they have trialled are then fed into governing body meetings. And just above that one on the right, we have worked with the local authority to track and contact parents who have not responded to their entitlement to free school meal, and updates on this are provided at governing body meetings. Just give you a chance to have a little look through the other couple. Okay, so the next steps as governors, really important if you could ensure that equity and tackling poverty is a standard agenda item on your governing meetings. Maybe have a little think about what your school already does to support your pupils and families in these areas, and no doubt they're already doing some amazing things, but are there areas for improvement? Check if your school's already signed up to our Tackling the Impact of Poverty on Education programme, and please signpost to them if they're not and you think that they would be interested. And look out for our Governor's Guide, which will be published on Hub shortly. I think that's all from me, apart from to hope that everybody finds our Governor's Guides useful. And as Kate said before, please get in touch if there's any further information that you need.
Thank you, Abby, for that information there. Yeah, so this brings us to the end of the sort of presentation, really, in terms of covering what we wanted to cover today.